So excited to have everyone here and united in this movement. Um, we're going to be discussing what's been going on across the nation with advocating for menstrual equity on a policy level. To introduce myself first, my name is Fiona. Great to meet you all. I'm the Period Community Organizer, or PCO, from California. I'm 19 years old. And Period is a global youth-led nonprofit that strives to eradicate period poverty and stigma through service, education, and advocacy. And Period is so glad to partner with both Period Law and Alliance for Period Supplies to present you all this panel this morning. And we have our beautiful logos up here. A little bit more about me. I'm an undergraduate student at UCLA, and my hometown is in Orange County in Southern California. I've been involved in period equity organizing since my junior year of high school, with the implementation side of a state bill at the California level, AB 367, which placed menstrual products in schools. And now I still work a lot in the period equity space through youth movements, and I co-lead a youth-led organization called What We All Deserve, and we work on basic needs and economic justice policies. With that being said, I can pass it on to each of our panelists to share a little bit more about themselves, their names, their roles, and their organizations. And we can start off with Lacey.
Thanks so much, Fiona. My name is Lacey Gero. I'm the Director of Government Relations at the Alliance for Period Supplies. The Alliance for Period Supplies is a national network of nonprofits that work in their local communities to ensure that period poverty doesn't exist. And they do that through collecting, warehousing, and distributing period supplies. And so our organization works to eradicate period poverty through that work, but also through advocacy, awareness building, and research. And so I know many of the people on this call today are members of our organization, and that is why that I do the work that I do, is to make sure that our members have the tools for advocacy and that we can all work together to truly end period poverty. So thank you for having me. I guess I can pass it along to Sydney.
Awesome. Hi, everyone. My name is Sydney Ramon, and I serve as the National Policy Coordinator at Period. As Fiona, our moderator and Period Community Organizer in California, did a great job of sharing. Period is a global youth-fueled nonprofit working to eradicate period poverty through stigma through advocacy, service, and education. In my role specifically, I track and coordinate menstrual equity legislation across the country and work alongside our community organizers, state and national coalitions, and partners like APS and Period Law to advance these policies in these states. So thanks so much for having me.
Hi, everyone. My name's Suzanne Herman. I'm the legal director at Period Law. We think of ourselves as the lawyers for the other groups that are here represented today and everyone else here on this call working in this space. We're the only national legal nonprofit that focuses on menstrual equity policies. Our driving mission is to remove the sales tax on menstrual products in all 50 states, 20 left to go. But we do also work in other spaces of menstrual equity, whatever they may be, wherever the need is, and we're there to provide the legal expertise on those issues. Thanks for having me as well.
Thank you so much to our amazing panelists. Having been in this movement for a couple years, it's definitely a intimate but mighty movement. And I love the different perspectives we have on this call today to talk a little bit about this past year. So to kick off, I'd like to highlight some numbers from this past legislative session, and onwards, since some are still going on in some states. So 63 menstrual equity policies were introduced across the nation, and a total of 10 were signed into law this past session. And of course, there are still ongoing bills being pushed across the finish line by advocates and different stakeholders in the process. 8 out of 10 signed bills were bipartisan, so we're really seeing both Republicans and Democrats and other folks recognize the importance of deeming menstrual products as basic needs and as career liberation and essential to reproductive health and just overall mental health and physical health well-being. In total, 12 states introduced tampon tax repeal bills. 8 were bipartisan and 1 passed in South Carolina, which we'll get to a little bit more later. So much of our success across the nation can obviously be attributed to the hard work of organizers, legislative staff, legislative champions, and of course, young people who have really been fueling this movement. And in today's discussion, we'll also highlight some work from a few of the states and some lessons learned. So we'll start off a little bit by hearing more from our panelists about why their work in menstrual equity legislation is important to them and how they kind of got their career started off in that.
I can start this one. I always think that for a lot of people, this issue is kind of something that maybe they didn't know about, maybe they felt it, but they didn't know quite what it was. And then there's some sort of light bulb moment where these policies or lack thereof are explained to them, and then you just can't look away, and then you like must work at it until your little corner of it is solved. I think we all consider ourselves to try to be working ourselves out of jobs. And that was certainly what it was for me in law school. Wasn't on my radar per se, except in the way that kind of is for a lot of menstruating people. We know something's wrong. And then when I was connected to period law, it obviously changed the course of my career, and I'm very grateful I get to do that work as an attorney. It's not a typical path, but again, it's like once you see it. Yeah, that's a little bit about me.
For me, I was raised along the Texas-Mexico border. And just for some context, that region, 24% of families live below the federal poverty line, which is triple that of the entire United States. And so I was definitely no stranger to how people manage their periods in really unsafe ways in communities where access is so limited and where access is seen as a luxury rather than the necessity that it really is. And 2 years ago, actually, when Texas was in the process of passing the tax, I came into contact with advocacy around period poverty and menstrual equity legislation for one of the very first times. And it really opened my eyes to what I had normalized, which was a lack of access to products. And it gave me the language and really empowered me to be able to advocate for this issue in a way that I had never even thought of before. What was once a way of life was now a way that I could advocate for change. And so menstrual equity legislation is important to me because I've seen it firsthand, and it gives people now the power to be able to menstruate with dignity. So.
And for me, I have a background in public health. So I got my master's in public health at Tulane University and never learned about period poverty, or another issue that we work on, which is diaper need. Never learned about that in my curriculum in public health. But then I started working for the Louisiana Department of Health and worked on bills related to maternal mortality, related to infant mortality, really a lot of dark and heavy things. But one of the bills that came across my desk when I was in that role was a bill introduced by Representative Amy Freeman, what some of you may remember, House Bill 7, which was introduced in 2021. And it was a bill that would get rid of the tax on diapers, period supplies, and adult incontinence products. And so that was kind of my first intro into the issue. And from there, I really felt a passion for it. So when I started working for the National Diaper Bank Network and the Alliance for Period Supplies, that passion continued to grow as I got to know each and every member in our organization that is doing the work on the ground. And it's because of them that we really work to ensure that there are tools and advocacy efforts and coalitions that are happening that involve them and their perspective based on the work that they're seeing every single day. So really grateful to be with you all, because I know we've all been working in partnership and it's been amazing.
Thank you all so much for sharing your beautiful journeys. I love how you all mentioned that, period advocacy isn't something you initially think about when you think of reproductive health or basic needs, but it really touches like the intersection of so many issues, gender justice and creating like mental health solutions for people who are menstruating and really getting them that access. I'd love to hop into highlighting actually some specific states and activists from those states. As we know, so many period equity legislation happens at the state level, and that is both frustrating sometimes, but also a great access point just because it allows these campaigns to be more localized and it allows like community members to be more involved in advocating for state legislation. And I'd love to give a shout out and allow Karen from South Carolina to talk a little bit about her experience with organizing for South Carolina to repeal the tampon tax, which was a historic win. And we would love to hear a little bit from you about your experience.
So thank you all for having us today. Just know that this journey was not done in isolation. It was done in partnership. And so I give my partners at REN, which is the Women's Right for Equity Network, giving them the opportunity to enjoy and celebrate with us in this space. They did a lot of the work at the State House, and they definitely continue to push the information out. At the time, I represented the Period Project, and you see Pamela Askew, who's my predecessor. I mean, is my successor, not predecessor, my successor in the executive director position on the line as well. I have relocated to Arkansas, where we still have work to do in period equity. So can't wait to join the teams here to assist. But how we did it, it was perseverance, patience, and partnership. It was definitely working with our elected officials, looking at the partnerships that we could have throughout the community for the advocacy efforts, and those groups that were definitely focused on social action. So when we called upon all of those partnerships, they all came together for the greater good of the community. We definitely talked about it from a sales perspective of ROI. Why was this important to the citizens of South Carolina? Why did our legislators need to do this now? And in South Carolina, the legislative session is a 2-year session. And so we work continuously, even during the off season, to share why this was important. We also had media partners in this collaboration. And so there was times that we were able to get segments on the news to talk about this. A good time definitely for us was around tax-free weekend and individuals going back to school, when we could share that while there's so many products that were tax-free, our young people and our administrators were not going to partake in that because the basic essentials were not considered. So again, as we were advocating for the change, we had those partnerships, but the first year we were able to get it passed through the House, thanks to Representative Gilda Cobb Hunter out of Orangeburg, South Carolina. And we just knew it was going to be a slam dunk going into the Senate. After all, the House passed it unanimously, bipartisan participation from start to finish, but we hit a roadblock. And that's where that perseverance had to come in. We really, and my thought was, oh, it was going to be a slam dunk once it went through. It wasn't. So we had a lot more work to do in the Senate. Senator Katrina Shealy was God sent for us. She was definitely behind the movement, and she was very astute. But previously, it was coupled with our diapers as well, and there wasn't as much of an appetite. So that was what our representatives were able to share with us. We adjusted. They were able to push this bill through, which was House Bill 3560. Again, it was partnership, patience, and perseverance. I recommend anyone doing this work, use everyone in your community from start to finish. Those who you do not think are aligned, spend time with them. Have them to really ask the questions. A lot of it was around economics. And when we talk about the economics of this, the ROI was going to be much more than the risk. And then, we had a windfall from above when South Carolina figured out they had an unknown billion amount of dollars. So we were like, oh, if you have all of this, there's no reason why we can't get this tax passed. But with that, we talked about it from an education standpoint and employment standpoint. And so what will it do for companies when women do not have to leave their workplace, or if they are already on restricted income, that they don't have to use their additional income to pay the sales tax? Same thing for our young people in school. And so as we were able to shift the conversation, education and employment impact, and what it would do for the state, it was much more palatable, and we were successful, in it as well.
Thank you so much, Karen. That is incredible work. And congratulations to you and all the advocates who worked in that movement to make it happen. I know it'll impact hundreds of thousands of people in South Carolina. I love how you touched on honing in on all different types of partners. I know here in California, where I'm from, when we do organizing, we reach out to like education advocates, we reach out to like unions, we reach out to food justice advocates, because at the end of the day, like low-income families have to choose between spending money between different necessities, and money that they have to spend on period products is money taken away from housing and food, etc. So thank you so much, and again, congratulations.
Thank you. And Fiona, if I can add, do not forget the Retail Federation, and work with their lobbyists. When you get the retailers, really helps. So don't forget them in this. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much. Awesome. So that actually transitions great into, I wanted to also share a little bit about California and some initiatives that we've been up to in the past year. I can share real quick. So California has had a couple of menstrual equity bills proposed. We're actually still in our California legislative session. We have a session every year that ends in around the September, October time. So we're still trying to push some bills across the finish line and getting it signed by the governor. But actually, California's period equity movement is very dominated by young people. I actually worked in my organization along with a lot of students from the college and high school level on a couple of bills, and I can share a little about them today. We proposed Assembly Bill 1810 this year, which would expand menstrual product access for incarcerated folks in the California carceral facilities, to allow them to have unlimited access to menstrual products without having to request them, which is a huge issue that has been the foundation for a lot of lawsuits, complaints, and just basic human rights violations, especially ones that go and slip under the rug within the carceral facilities with not being able to access menstrual products. We also introduced Senate Bill 953 this year, which would place menstrual products in Medi-Cal. Unfortunately, that bill was held given California's our budget situation. But again, we got a lot of conversations going, and like Karen mentioned, like these are multi-year movements. And even just getting those conversations started with changing the narrative is super important. And I also like to lastly shout out Shreya, who don't think she's on this call, but she's actually a high school student who has been really the backbone and like the frontline champion of Assembly Bill 2229, which would put menstrual education within sexual health education for students grade 7 to 12 here in California. It would be an amazing change with learning about menstrual disorders and how to deal with menstrual conditions, and really getting younger people to learn about their bodies and how to take care of them. And that bill is currently in the Senate, and we're really excited to continue advocating for these policies. Awesome. So back to the panel, I would love to know a little bit more about what types of legislation we saw across the board in 2024, and how you think this was different from 2023, or similar, or what patterns were there going into this new year.
I can speak to a few sort of new bills that we saw this year that we don't typically, see a lot of or don't track very often. And you mentioned one, Fiona, and that was the bill to put period supplies under Medi-Cal, which is California's Medicaid program. We saw a similar bill in New Jersey that was introduced. It hasn't passed at this point, but I think it is a really important recognition that we're seeing that period supplies are medical supplies and needed for medical care. And so it's really exciting to see that those bills have been introduced, and we're hopeful that more states kind of take that up next year. And it was something that we haven't seen in previous years. Another bill that passed in Illinois was a bill that was called the Good Samaritan Liability Act. And essentially what the bill does is it protects manufacturers that donate tampons. For that bill, it actually also included protections for donations of reusable menstrual products like underwear and menstrual cups. And so that's, hopefully going to increase some of the donations in Illinois to nonprofits that give away those products. And so Illinois became the 5th state that actually passed that bill, joining Maine, Texas, Tennessee, and Rhode Island, who have done this in the past. And so now hopefully the manufacturers will be more willing to donate tampons in those states. And then just another bill, sort of not new, but kind of exciting thing that we're seeing is more bills trying to increase access to period supplies in public and government buildings. And we did see that in Hawaii, there was a bill that passed this year that actually is saying that the government buildings in Hawaii will have period products. And we're hopeful that we see more around the country on that. I know New York and California have also introduced those pieces of legislation.
Yeah, I can just quickly say from the tampon tax side, this has been a very quick moving area. The tampon tax repeal in 2016, 41 states chose to tax menstrual products, and now we have 20 left that still have the tax. I got a little turned around in the double negatives. But so obviously it's been a really fast moving ball. But in the last couple of years, we're left with a lot of Republican controlled states. So the progress has slowed down. Texas repealed the tax in 2023, and then obviously South Carolina this year. So we're seeing like a slower ball rolling effect. And we have to kind of attribute that to the Republican leadership. It's made us have to kind of re-strategize. But yeah, so it's an interesting development.
Yeah, thank you both for sharing. I know we highlighted a lot about our successes these past couple of minutes with getting very innovative bills introduced in states and also passing them. But a big part of the advocacy movement is, of course, talking a little bit about how we can improve every year and how we can build on the partnerships that we've made already. In your experiences, or just like talking to state advocates and working within these states, what do you think contributed to bills stalling in the legislature or getting held? And is there anything we could have done differently as a movement in certain states with making sure, those bills don't only get introduced, but they also continuously to get passed and signed in certain states, especially where we may not have as many political partnerships?
Something that I've seen that states have had to overcome just from speaking with organizations and individuals who are working on the ground is misconceptions around period products as both a necessity and what these policies are actually doing. I think for many of us, we're seeing these misconceptions and this inaccurate messaging play out on a national level, but for local advocates and state organizations, I think they've been having to overcome this uphill battle of the lack of education around these products and of course what these policies will actually do once they're implemented in schools, increasing access, eliminating the tax. And so I think just continuing to educate not only our community at large, but even our lawmakers who may largely be unfamiliar with these issues. I know Lacey talked earlier about her experience and having a bill come across her desk and that being kind of one of these first touch points. State legislative staff, especially in the States. I know I'm from Texas, so we have a biannual session. They have to cover so much, and the expectation that they're professionals are well versed in every single issue is impossible. And so doing a better job of reaching them and meeting them where they are and educating them on these issues is something we'll continue to do. And I think organizations in the state are doing a great job just continuing to fight that fight.
I completely agree, Sydney. I think that education piece is just, it's a constant. Like we just have to keep educating people and re-educating people and bringing this up over and over again. Another part of this is that we have to continue to build bipartisan support. And so I think, Fiona, you mentioned like 8 of the 10 bills had bipartisan support, which is so, so important for getting bills across the line. So that's obviously something that sometimes can stall, especially when we're looking at states across the country that have a majority one party over the other. You have to have that bipartisan support. Another reality that I think we're facing right now is that states are getting a little concerned about their budgets because there were a lot of states, and California is an example because they were in a deficit this year, but there's a few states around the country too who are going into next year with what they're calling a flat budget. So they're just keeping the budget that they had and they're not adding new things. And that creates a challenge from the start because you have to really fight your way in and sort of find, is there a way in? And I think that's one of the issues that we started to see this year. And unfortunately, I think will be a reality again next year. And I'm curious from Suzanne's perspective on the tax side of things, like what if that is impacting a lot of the tax work.
Yeah, it's interesting because Karen touched on this too, this idea of the tampon tax as ROI. It just, the amount of revenue that's lost by repealing the tax is so nominal that we almost try to not engage in those budgetary conversations unless it's with like friendlies who need to know like how to approach their other legislative peers and talk about it. But when we are kind of speaking against people who are maybe coming into this for the first time, to say that a state can't afford it is like a misnomer and gets us off on the wrong foot. It's like you can't afford not to do it, as Karen was mentioning. Yeah, and I just think her other 2 points are the persistence and the partnerships are also the kinds of things that we ran up against in other states this year. Like you were saying, Lacey, if you don't have bipartisan support, it's going to be hard to do this. And also, like if maybe you're a freshman legislator who is really passionate about this subject, but you haven't been there for 2 or 3 years to lay the groundwork, it can kind of come off as and also this is in the news a lot more in kind of like a pop culture-y way. So it can come off as a fad when really it's like years of on the ground persistence and partnership work with people on both sides of the aisle that makes it work. So unfortunately, even though it means that the energy is there, that is something we run into.
Yeah, thank you all for sharing those lessons. Lacey,
Sorry, you froze for a
I'm
second.
sorry, did I? Okay, am I back online? Okay, perfect. I'm so sorry about that. Like I was saying, in California and like even states that are like known a little bit more to be accepting and encouraging of policies like for period equity, the budget is always such a hard component with just figuring out how we're supposed to get the money for those programs because our biggest programs to help the most families are usually the well-funded ones. So it's always very hard with trying to gain partnerships and like support and allies within the legislature to help us with those budget asks. Would love to pivot back to the happier side of things and talk a little bit about what you all think contributed to the success of past legislation. And I know we did already touch on, Karen touched so beautifully on the 3 Ps, persistence, patience, and partnerships. But if you, any of you have any specific stories you'd like to highlight, would love for you to share.
I have to share, and I see Dr. Amanda Rowe is commenting in the chat because I have to share about Nebraska, how amazing this past year with Nebraska has been. Basically, a coalition has been working together. I don't know, Amanda, you probably correct me if I'm wrong in the chat, but we first started like having this conversation in 2023 or maybe 2022 even, of starting a coalition, and then really with Access Period and the Period program at University of St. Mary, like a coalition quickly came together in Nebraska. And so I think what we saw, although what passed in Nebraska was a pilot program for products in schools, it was a really exciting step because all of us on the coalition, I think, didn't have an expectation at the beginning of the legislative cycle that a bill would pass at all. We had this kind of idea that like it would be an educational year. It's an opportunity for that education, but we didn't know if something would happen. But I think what worked is that the coalition really organized together. They had a menstrual equity summit in December before legislative session started, which basically got together this huge group of advocates in the state to, talk about what the issue is, to share research and to share what's going on across the country. And so that kind of started off on the right foot with that summit. And then the group just constantly communicated during legislative session. They actually printed off postcards and wrote postcards because apparently that really works well there. And I mean, I don't know how many postcards ended up getting sent, but on top of the postcards, there was a virtual letter writing campaign. And then there was testimony organized and people at the Capitol. And so it was just this constant communication and efforts of this group. And I think that's really what pushed it across the line. And not even to mention the student advocates, Cassidy Bell, who I know can't be on today, who was working in the legislature. So she had that tie-in. And it was just really exciting to see this group that came together rather quickly, but had such a strong impact. So just want to congratulate the Nebraska group, but also say like, this is how we get it done.
Well, thank you so much for sharing about that. I actually had a quick follow-up question. Just in my experience, I see a lot of actually state advocates helping each other out, like states that have already implemented handbooks. For example, for menstrual products in schools, we here in California, we took a lot of inspiration from the Oregon handbook. As advocates who work from like a more national perspective, have you seen a lot of that happening? Or any examples in the past year where like state advocates have been able to like have that dialogue with helping each other out on advocacy?
Yeah, I think the handbook is actually a really great example. We had the opportunity to sit on a Nebraska coalition call and share a little bit more about the California handbook, both for students and for school districts, and of course the Oregon Department of Education handbook. And I think that's just really indicative that the work also doesn't stop when the legislation is passed. I know I've also had the pleasure of sitting on calls with advocates and organizations who, okay, our bill is passed, now what? And continuing to push the movement forward and making sure that we're holding folks accountable and actually implementing the work that we're doing. And so I think handbooks, Fiona, is a really great example of how communities can continue to organize and continue to work, not just to pass this legislation, but also make sure that it's being implemented in a way that is most impactful and really honors the original intent of those bills. And of course, the activists who've been working on them.
Yes, thank you so much for highlighting implementation is so important, and also like gaining community perspectives within that process. Moving forward, after celebrating all of our successes and reflecting on things we can improve on, what do you think advocates can expect to see within the next year and beyond?
I think that back to kind of the budgets, which sounds depressing, but I think that we're really going to have to voice like, continue to voice how important this is and that return on investment, because I think that's going to be a large part of this conversation. But I do think what we will see is even more advocates across the country. I think one of the states, and I see Representative in the chat, one of the states that we didn't talk about is Arkansas. And one of the amazing things that happened in Arkansas this year, and Suzanne, I think you can probably speak even more to this, is, the coalition was really working on a ballot measure initiative. So I don't know, Suzanne, if you want to talk about that, but I don't want to forget about Arkansas.
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you, Lacey, for bringing it up, and thank you, Representative Bennett, for being here with us. it was such an interesting thing to watch happen in Arkansas. Basically, the Arkansas sessions, fiscal sessions happen every other year, and non-fiscal sessions, the opposing one. So the main group there that was working on the tampon tax repeal didn't feel that this was the year they could do it legislatively, so they spent their time working on a ballot initiative to repeal sales tax that way. And what they would have to do to get themselves on the ballot is really extensive. A lot of petitions needed to be signed, and they needed to be across a representative sampling of the counties in Arkansas, which is basically, I wouldn't say impossible, but near to impossible for a small group with limited funding. That being said, just trying to and getting the amount of signatures they did, upwards of 4,000, laid this groundwork for the upcoming legislative session. So I think really to answer your question, Fiona, of like what we're going to see this year is that we're going to see just like keeping the pressure on from all these different viewpoints. Period Law is a really big supporter of the Stamp Act, which is federal legislation that would repeal the sales tax on menstrual products. And even if that doesn't succeed, because we're in such, we're an election year, we're such a polarized whatever, or even if it succeeds and then is immediately challenged in the courts, what we're going to see is that it's on the news, it's on people's minds. We're hearing Congress people speaking to their state, local representatives, like everybody's hearing about it in different avenues. Period Law also tries to get this into the executive branch of state governments via, we do like refund requests. Like if you go on our website at any time, if you're in one of the tampon taxing states, you can submit a refund request after you bought menstrual products and paid the sales tax. And so that puts these forms into state comptrollers' hands, Department of Revenue's hands. We just like don't want anyone to be able to get away from this topic, and then eventually it will pass through the means that it's probably always going to be, which is legislatively.
And I think too, some of the things that we may see more of in the upcoming year is, since so many states now have passed period products in schools, I think that we're going to see some states looking at how can we expand that? How can we do better? But also, can we include colleges and universities, public colleges and universities? And I think this is a really important time to make that happen, because we know that period poverty doesn't end once high school ends. That's just not how it works. And for high school students who are entering into college and university, it can even get worse because maybe they had that access at school, or maybe, they don't have the funds because they're spending it on school. So I think we might see more of that legislation introduced this year and in the coming years to really spark from those period products in schools bills.
Absolutely, and love so much hearing about Arkansas, and just seeing how different states have come up with really innovative solutions. And like you mentioned Suzanne, with honing in on the executive branch as well. That is incredible, and like really pinpointing all of our advocacy points. Super important with getting that kind of like whole system those whole system goals in terms of menstrual equity for all. Moving into actually addressing a little bit, addressing our audience a little bit more. So I'm a youth advocate in this movement, and I always knew I wanted to be involved in the policy side of making change. Education and direct service are just as equally important, but I've always been super fascinated in the policy making process and like garnering young people involvement in policymaking. But sometimes, of course, if you're not already affiliated with a nonprofit or like have an access point in the legislative session, like penetrating those systems can be so hard for certain folks who are not as used to like how these systems work and like how to contact their representatives or what to say and how to share their stories and how to make it loud. What pieces of advice, having worked in this space for a couple of years, would you give to the audience who maybe they don't like work in policy already, they're students or young people, or they're community members who want to get more involved? What pieces of advice do you have for them to support legislation in their state or continue to voice their support if they're already involved in the movement?
Through my role at Period, I have a really cool opportunity to work with young people like Fiona and like so many others who are working as community organizers in our state. So I really resonate with this question because through this process, I've gotten to know the various barriers that exist in every single state for youth to get involved in policy, whether that's the knowledge, the resources, the skill set, or even the language of how we talk about period poverty. So I know just really working on reaching out to any organization, even us on the panel, if you're interested in getting more involved. I know Period, in partnership with another organization, Ignite, we host an Activate Your Advocacy Bootcamp, and we'll be hosting that in September of this year. And this is exactly what we do. It's a 4-part workshop that helps equip you with all of the tools and knowledge you need to effectively advocate for both menstrual equity in your community, but even larger issues that are impacting your community. Because we recognize, like Fiona said, menstrual equity is at the intersection of so many other issues that are impacting members of our community and also that our young people really care about. So definitely seeking out those opportunities and taking advantage. Yes, thank you, Dama, for putting that link. Taking advantage of those opportunities when you find them to really continue to build that knowledge and those skill sets. Because yeah, Fiona, we definitely recognize it's really hard and there's a lot of barriers to access. So anything we can do to kind of break those down.
Yeah, I mean, and from small to large, I mean, there's changing the way that you speak about menstrual products, for example. Feminine hygiene has gone the way of other outdated terminology, educating your loved ones, your families, talking to men about menstruation, all the way up to, you know, calling your legislators and letting them know that as a constituent of theirs, this is important to you and you expect them to back all menstrual equity legislation that they see. So many other like seemingly small but really build upon themselves ways to be involved in your daily life. Submit a refund request every time you're, you know, driving through Wyoming on some wonderful vacation or something.
And I think another thing too is watch out for calls to action. So I know Period Law and Period and Alliance for Period Supplies and Period, we do collaborative social media posts and sometimes they have calls to action on them. So look out for those, especially during the legislative sessions so that you can get involved during that time and take action and be a part of that change. If you are not aware if your state has a coalition or if you're thinking about starting one, I highly encourage you to do so. If you don't know where to start, maybe start with, you know, people that you work with all the time or people that you know of within your state that are policymakers that maybe have some recommendations of people that might want to get involved. But I think the coalition strategy and the community organizing is what's really making that difference. So if you can get something started in your state, if there isn't something already, definitely highly recommend that. Oh, and thank you, Sydney, our from our team posted a link to our conference, annual conference every year. Also just want to flag that every year during May, there's a week called Period Poverty Awareness Week. And that week is really meant to increase awareness for period poverty and get people engaged. So please be on the lookout for that. The dates are linked on our website. If I get them wrong, Sydney will be very mad at me, but they're the 12th to the 18th of May this year. So please get involved and stay tuned for that.
Thank you so much. And so many of the programs that you all mentioned have definitely helped me and other young people get involved with the movement. And state coalitions are so important. I know here in California, like it's really a resource hub for, like I mentioned before, because of how intersectional the menstrual equity issue is. We have folks from like all different types of organizations joining and like coming together for this collective movement, whereas like menstrual equity might not get as much time in like a coalition for reproductive health or something like that. So it's been really, really great just having a statewide coalition designated for that. As we're wrapping up, maybe before we get into question and answer, I just wanted to invite the panelists and also Karen, if y'all have any last minute notes that you want to end off this conversation with before we go to Q&A.
Just a few things for me that I did not get an opportunity to share. And it is my sincere appreciation for all the work that Suzanne and her team at Period Law did in helping us. I would be able to call Suzanne or email and say, this is happening. Suzanne would provide us with something within 15, 20 minutes. and just was always on point with getting us something in a very timely manner. When I shared about the partnerships, I really mean these partnerships are essential because a lot of things legislatively will come up last minute, and sometimes you didn't know it was even on the agenda. But there was never a time that we needed information from Susan, and she was unable to provide it. So just, I wanted to say thank you so much, Period Law, for your assistance.
That is such a kind thing to say. I was gonna say I was gonna do a shameless plug for Period Law, but that was fantastic advertising. And just say that, you know, to kind of say we're always like here to provide this legal research. It's our niche, and I'm very like honored and grateful that it's my full-time job to do. But that being said, in your each person's individual work, my advice is just to lean on the experts and the people working on it. Like, don't reinvent the wheel. Ask each other what's working in other states, what data is already out there, so that you can, you know, spend your most time of doing this effectively, because it can get really tiring. And yeah, thanks so much, Karen.
And I'll just add that obviously we didn't get to every bill that was introduced this year. So I know there's like very passionate people out there that wanted us to mention probably a few more states, but you can always find information on our menstrual equity tracker, which Dama had shared in the chat if you want to see what's going on in your state. In case it wasn't mentioned, a lot of state legislative sessions are wrapping up. And so some of those bills aren't going to be the same for next year, but as soon as 2025 starts and those sessions starts, that tracker will update with new bills.
Absolutely. Definitely appreciate the warm last remarks. And like Suzanne mentioned, advocacy work does entail burnout sometimes, but it's been really, really good just to like feel in community with so many advocates and being able to ask for help. And I know so many of my adult mentors in the period movement have been there for me when I've been doing youth organizing and learning, building the plane as I go. Um, Great. I think we can open it up to Q&A. If folks have questions that they would love to ask the panel or Karen, any sharing opportunities, anything like that. I know Lisa earlier in the chat, she asked if Karen can mention all the legislators who were supportive and helpful in their work in South Carolina.
And so I did share two names. The bill coming out of the House was championed by Hilda Cobb Hunter. She is a Democratic representative out of Orangeburg. And also in on the Senate side, it was Senator Katrina Shealy. And there are several additional individuals who assisted us through this legislature. Being Tamika Isaac Devine, when she joined us, she was there. Marjorie Bright Matthews, so many, and definitely Chandra Dillard. But they all just opened up and was helpful. There was a documentary that was being filmed during this time. So the documentary is set to come out next year. And it was on sister senators, but they decided to highlight our initiatives with passing this particular legislation. Hopefully it will give us an opportunity to get even more notoriety from what is happening from a period equity standpoint, and more people will know this is a true issue for a lot of millions of people waking up.
Thank you. Do any other folks have questions? Okay, there's a question. Was there a community partner or individual that was helpful that you didn't initially expect to be?
I don't know if that's directed at me, but if so, not that I didn't expect to be, because I took it on that everybody had a role to. And I specifically wanted men to be a part of this because sometimes it's easier for a man to talk to a man about something that another man may be uncomfortable with. And so a part of it was our strategy to make sure that as we were speaking, that men were comfortable and were understanding it. And that's why we kind of adjusted our conversation from a business and economic impact perspective. So it would be something that was a little bit more palatable and understandable, because some men just like, oh, I can't stay to work, period. Well, you can't talk about the financial impact of menstrual health.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much. There's another question that is, have you found menstrual equity frame difficult to operationalize in red states? I found that red states are more receptive to feminine hygiene framing. Could we create a more bipartisan frame? That's a great question. Anyone want to touch on that?
Yeah, I think about this all the time. And it is really knowing your audience. That is very true that while we want to stop using those words and we want to like make it clear that we understand that not all people who menstruate are women, so in order to pursue our goals, sometimes we're going to have to speak in a certain way to certain people. So that's just where that like slowly pushing into the world the correct way to speak about these things and decreasing stigma is always going to come back and be helpful. We do a lot of reframing in talking points and legal framework in terms of that. So also period law believes that this is an unconstitutional tax, and that's because it is paid only by one sex and is therefore in violation of the 14th Amendment of state and federal constitutions. However, of course, that also brings up a lot of sticky questions about identity and politics in that way. So yeah, you just have to, really know your stuff, be ready to speak clearly and correctly, and also know your audience. It's not really an answer, but it's just an acknowledgement of the trickiness of it, and that we're all like working together. And as long as we come at it from an honest place, we can figure that out.
And if I can add, it's gonna, in your partnerships, that transparency on the front side is going to be very important, because I remember being challenged in a meeting with one of my partners who felt that the using of the feminine framework, it was leaving out the LGBTQ. And so we had to explain, who the audience is, that we are speaking for all menstruators, and that as a result of that, this is just what was passed our legislation, but not that we were not in part.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you. If folks have any more questions, feel free to drop in the chat. I think we have time for one more.
Hi, can I just ask my question here, or would you like me to write in the chat?
That's perfect. Go ahead.
Okay, I'm Olivia Gudelman. I'm a high schooler in New Jersey, and I am doing a period product drive in my community and in other parts of like New Jersey. So I'm familiar with that and how to set that up, but I wanted to kind of get more like political and, make more of a change. But I don't, all of this is so amazing. I don't know how to start that, like the first initial step.
I think in New Jersey, there's a lot of activism and people that are wanting to work on this issue. And I think there are some coalitions that certainly we can help you connect with and connect to. So I don't know, Dama, if you're going to drop our email addresses in the comments, but please, I think feel free to reach out to all of us and we can make some connections. That's a lot of what we do. I remember just a few weeks ago, Suzanne and I were on a call with a group of young students who just wanted to know where to start, and we're happy to sit through and talk about that. So please feel free to connect with us, and that's a great starting place. And sometimes we can just work with each other to figure out who else can you be connected to.
Okay, thank you so much.
Yeah, and I did just want to highlight that as an organization, Period also has chapters that operate all across the country, made up of both youth and adult organizers. I know that we're really active in New Jersey, and so if you want to reach out to us, I think I dropped my email and also our policy@period.org email. Feel free to reach out to either of those. I'd love to put you in contact with some of the youth leaders that we have, and also talk about some of the ways that we like tangibly train young people on the very basics of advocacy to kind of help you get started. So I'm happy to be a resource in that way.
Thank you. And I think, Olivia, even being on this call is so amazing, and like finding out about an opportunity like this to listen and asking questions is so great as a youth activist. Um, I know Dama dropped a couple of contact information resources, and also we'll be sending out a follow-up email to all that registered with contact info in case folks want to reach out with specific questions or like ask for meetings or anything like that to help again like centralize the movement and share resources. I think we have time for maybe one last quick question. Molly, go ahead.
Yeah, so I just kind of wanted to jump in. I come from a different perspective, but this is also for Olivia or anyone out there that wants to connect. I actually went to undergrad in New Jersey, and I wrote a thesis on menstrual equity for incarcerated women in that setting. So I kind of took more of like from academia, looking at it and looking at a social movement. And now I'm pursuing a PhD in political science at the University of Missouri. So I can definitely give some, I don't know, perspective from more of like the academia slash like poli-sci perspective.
Thank you. And we, in the policy advocacy movement, we work all the time with folks from research and like direct service just to make sure that we are, helping people out who need it through every avenue. Um, Awesome. Well, it's 11 and I don't want to hold people back too long, but just wanted to thank everyone so much for giving us an hour of your time. This was such a great conversation that we had, and it was so good meeting all the panelists and Karen especially. Thank you so much for your work and congratulations again. And I just feel so grateful to be in community with everyone here, and I'm sure that the panelists and other folks do as well. Please reach out with any of the resources we shared in the chat and our emails. And I'm sure that we will continue building this movement because it doesn't stop this year or next year, and there's always work to do. But I'm just glad to be doing it with everyone here. Thank you all so much for joining.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye, y'all.